LogRhythm's Netmon Freemium delivers real-time network visibility to quickly identify emerging threats in your IT environment. Netmon Freemium is a free commercial-grade network forensics and traffic analytics solution. You can use Netmon Freemium's powerful capabilities to search against all observed network traffic, identify abnormal traffic patterns and application usage, and quickly analyze full packet captures. Take the first step towards real-time network visibility. Visit logRhythm.com/freemium to learn more and download it today. Pony Express. Check out their line of penetration testing devices, including the Pwn Pad, Pwn Phone, and Pwn Pro. For enterprises, there's Pwn Pulse, providing continuous visibility into wired, Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth spectrums across all physical locations, including remote sites and branch offices. For all those hard-to-reach places, there's Pony Express. Visit them on the web at ponyexpress.com. Welcome back, everyone. One of the problems that I've had as a security professional providing security solutions for an enterprise is allowing people to understand that a threat is real. And I think that's just one of the things you can accomplish with a new offering from Grim called Crossbow. It lets you basically Lego block build malware and safely deploy it in your environment so that you can test security solutions and your security architecture. I think one of the other benefits as I continue to run this advertisement because they're a sponsor, and Bryson and team is awesome, and we did a video series with them at DEF CON and an interview with Bryson on Paul Security Weekly. Make sure you check that out. I think one of the other benefits is, convincing people that these threats are real and that maybe we need a new security solution or need to adjust the solutions we have, but maybe we need to change our fundamental security architecture. And getting people on board in doing that, sometimes they have to see it. Sometimes they have to see, proof of that or understand that type of threat, and that's what Crossbow does. So you should check it out. I think it's an entirely new category, and we can talk more about that on Friday. But I think Grim has a great opportunity to create a new category. I think others have kind of flirted with this category but haven't really pushed it the way that Grim has. So I'm excited about it. So let's see. We're talking about enterprise network monitoring. This is one of those things you were talking about the SOC and how Michael, when Awake was doing some of their interviews with SOC analysts, and they're like, yeah, like I really hate my job. When I asked people, because I did a Twitter poll, an impromptu kind of Twitter poll, like, hey, I was researching enterprise network monitoring largely because I want to implement something for here at Security Weekly and talk about it on this show. I was like, wow, there's a lot of solutions out there for this. Good Lord. And so I was like, well, let me do a poll. Let me see what our listeners are using for enterprise network monitoring. No one was really excited about it. Some of the comments are, like they're happy with it, but they're like, this is a good one. So it gets the job done, but it's not very pretty. Or, hey, homemade Python scripts. Like they were so frustrated with what was out there. Like, I'm just going to code something myself. And so just the whole attitude towards doing this was like, yeah, there's stuff out there. It's kind of one of those thankless, I think, solutions that you're going to implement in your enterprise. It should just be there. It should work. It's another one where you have to build confidence in it as well. I remember having enterprise network monitoring solutions in place at various organizations. If it had false positives, people would just instantly ignore it. Like, oh, you don't need to worry about alerts from that thing. It's always wrong, and that's bad. I think there's a security play here before we, kind of get into some of the solutions. I really think it's a security play. I think it can be one of those indicators that something is bad. If a machine is not available any longer, if a service isn't available, if there's other performance characteristics happening, it could trigger a security event. I wanted to get your guys' take on that before we kind of move forward and talk about some of the offerings.
Michael's probably better in a position for this one than I am. I mean, I know a little bit of this, but
Michael?
Well, I mean, here's typically where I see stuff like this happening, and I might be taking this in a different direction, but then I'm kind of curious on the feedback to it. I think that there's a lot of people in organizations today that are trying to solve problems like this, and they'll go and they'll ask for budget, and what they get instead is, do whatever you want, but I got no budget for you. So if you can find open source, knock yourself out. Oh, P.S., don't screw anything up. I don't have time for that.
Yeah.
And so that's why we find people that grab some of these things, who do their own Python scripts. They're trying to figure it out, and they say to themselves, and I get it, oh, if I just knew what was going on, if I just had some visibility, right? That's a phrase that I mean, it's not a new phrase, but I'm noticing it cycle up a lot in the pitches I'm getting in the last 90 days. Visibility. We don't have enough visibility. We need more visibility. The board needs visibility. You need visibility. We all need visibility. Visibility sucks. All right. Well, hey, let me go do it. And so then the thing I look at is, okay, well, so, my experience with open source, and I know all the good to it, and I am not against open source software, but sometimes it's kind of like, to me, somebody saying, hey, stop using an Apple laptop. Just go build your own and maintain it. Really? With what free time?
Mm-hmm.
Let's assume I have the technical skills,
right.
But I'm not you, Paul, so I don't. But let's pretend for a minute that I did, because I went through that fancy a couple times. It was so maddening for me to have to recompile stuff, and then drivers for this didn't work, and then I did it. Oh, it was just
it's better.
It didn't work.
I will say on that front, Michael, it is much better.
Yeah,
now.
no, I've watched your experience. Yeah. No, I get that, and so there's times I think about it, but so I kind of see this as being the same way. Like there's a cost in terms of your time. There's a frustration to it. There's a way to make it work. And so it's kind of like, it goes back to the question I always like to ask: what's the problem you're trying to solve? And is this the way to go about it? And or is this where a commercial solution is better? Or are you even mature enough for it? Yeah. Is this really where you need to be spending your time?
I think the problem statement, visibility certainly, which is kind of a broad and encompassing thing, but certainly there's benefits to that, to having that visibility, right?
And everybody uses it.
And everyone uses it, right?
But here's one of everybody's pillars is visibility somewhere, right?
But here's a more specific problem, right? I am concerned about the risk if one of my security solutions that I have in place or pieces of my security architecture isn't running. If it's failed in some way, I need to know that. And I think that's really the security play for me, and one of the reasons why I'm looking at some of this technology is if I know I've got certain controls in place or certain solutions or part of my architecture that implement some security measure, I got to know if that's gone away. And if I don't, then that's really bad, because something bad is going to happen as a result of that security control not being in place. And that's one reason. Go ahead, Matt.
But you're only going to get part of that visibility from some of these tools. Right?
Correct.
If you've got stuff running on the endpoint, how are you going to monitor that? Right? And so this gives you aspects of it. But back to Michael's point, look, there's some good open source tools out there that can do this inexpensively. But think about now you've got to correlate all the data, right? We just got done with a segment talking about how the SIEM is not done very well in this space. So I've got a freeware network monitoring software, but I also need to pull some stuff off the endpoint. Oh, by the way, do I have to go get some open source threat intelligence feeds so I can see what exploits are? You're recreating a commercial product in some respects. So I don't, the value here of open source is, okay, initially free, but then how much time and effort am I going to put in to try to put this into some database, correlate it with other data to get something that I can actually do something with on the other side of it?
Sure. And a lot of these solutions do have an open source or free offering that you can try and then purchase an enterprise version of it, because I think largely they've recognized that lesson you just talked about, Matt, is they're looking for that next one. So in my poll, there was one that came up a lot more than anyone else. I got about 20 responses, and there's like 2, 4, 6, 7 of them. In overwhelmingly were Zabbix was the company, an open source solution that they talked about, and they were really happy with that. Now, what's interesting, we get to now talk about deploying another agent into your environment, because Zabbix is another agent. So when we talk about like when are you ready, Michael, which I think you've already pointed out up to this point already, is that you have to have the ability to deploy an agent. So does that mean maybe first in our segment we need to talk about how managing all of your infrastructure and the ability for you to deploy this stuff, which is another open source versus commercial, like to use Ansible or Ansible is the one that I'm looking into for future segments on the show. And that gives you the ability to control your environment potentially and deploy this agent. But I'm not sure how much insight, to your point, Matt, how much insight on the actual endpoint you get. Do you get a process list? Do you know when a process dies from this? Is that the difference between open source and commercial? Could be, very likely. But Zabbix,
but there's a step. But there's a step before that, right? How do I know what's in the environment to even install the agent on?
Yeah.
Right.
Yes,
So we haven't. We put the cart before the horse,
This
right?
is true. Right.
Look, I go buy Zabbix. I go put it on all my endpoints. Is that all of my endpoints?
Yeah.
I don't know. Who's doing the best asset discovery to say, oh, look, I found a new endpoint on the network. Let me auto. So there's a lot of pieces here if you're going to try to do this, right?
Right.
Part of it is, am I using Nmap and just discovering constantly on my network to see what's there, integrating into some sort of deployment mechanism to have the agent installed for me to now get the data I need to say, oh, now I can do enterprise network monitoring, right? I mean, that's a lot of steps to do. Maybe not if you have a large security team in some of the enterprises, but for SME and SMB, no way. It's just there's too much here, I think, to try to piece all this together. And
if we talk about SMB, the problem that I've noticed in because we had Nagios and people have issues with Nagios, primarily configuration setup and stability of Nagios is why all of these, one reason why a lot of these other solutions exist, but also the time from when you've selected a solution to it actually having some benefit, that process is a pain in the ass, quite frankly. And a lot of the comments were kind of along those lines, like people basically will switch between different open source and commercial solutions to whatever is more easily configurable in their environment. So that's a huge factor to look at when you're looking at these different solutions. There's also a learning curve. I mean, because there's, like you said, Matt, like the analytics on this is an endless, sea of different things that you can analyze to get different data points, and obviously defining which ones are important to you is certainly there. One of my use cases, right, is it's not going to. Some of them actually do discover new hosts and allow you to add those in, and that's a function of this particular category of software. But if I know in my production environment, let's say for the podcast, I know what's important, right? Maybe I just want to monitor what's important. I still got to think about what's new and what I haven't discovered, but I know what's important. I want to monitor that for all kinds of things, uptime, performance, that kind of stuff. So Zabbix was the one on the list. OpenNMS was another one that came up a couple of times that people mentioned. And then there were a lot of like one-offs. Nsinga was on there, Ganglia, Libre NMS, Observium, Influx. So there's a lot of different solutions out there for this.
There's a couple more, Xenos and I think Sensu, all play in this kind of category as well. So there's a few of them out there.
Now, to speak,
I don't know how good any of them are.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't have time to play with that stuff.
Yeah, that would be a lot of time to go evaluate all of these. There are a lot of reviews out there, and our listeners definitely weighed in, and it's still open for people who want to weigh in on this particular subject. One of the interesting things in terms of deployment, Matt, that I think you'll find interesting is a lot of these particular solutions have moved to containers to ease that installation and setup, right? Like rather than building this all from scratch, like just get our container, deploy your Docker instance. And that has certainly helped. And I've played around with Schenken. Schenken is one that was a Nagios rewrite or something that allows you to deploy in a container, which I think is nice. And so if you're a security professional or IT professional that wants to start playing around with containers and you're like, I'm not really happy with my monitoring software, or maybe I want this monitoring software to be just specifically to monitor my security infrastructure, you get to learn containers and Docker maybe along the way and ease your deployment time for these particular solutions. So,
and you're starting to see commercial products down this path as well, right? And so,
SolarWinds was big in this particular space, correct?
Oh, were they? So this is a couple weeks ago we talked about the Black Hat Debrief show. We talked about Capsulate a little bit. This is exactly what they're doing, right? They're trying to do this monitoring for cloud native. Looks like they're kind of doing this, hey, just load my container in the environment and then I monitor this stuff. So the container market is getting a little interesting, right? And you guys know I track this really deeply. I mean, it just the approaches. There's kind of I'll call it three primary approaches to this. One is the subset I call privileged access. It's either going to be a privileged container or it's going to be some sort of kernel-based agent, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is where you see StackRox, you see Aqua, you see Twistlock, even Capsulate kind of in that space, right? And that's the predominant one that we're starting to see. I am starting to see a few vendors start to go down more of an embedded path where they're embedding themselves into the container where they don't need a privileged container or privileged access at the kernel, which could be interesting, waiting to see how some of that plays out.
But that's interesting,
but you're going to continue to see this evolution in the container space.
What I like about something being in the kernel, if it's monitoring my containers, and I have an application deployed in a container space in Docker, if a container goes away, I want to automatically spin up a new one, right? And that if you're inside the container, I don't know you necessarily can do that easily. If you're in the kernel space monitoring all the containers, you can say, oh, that instance went away. Let me go deploy a new one.
Yeah, I think there are ways to do it because they have this really, I think what they'll end up with is really deep instrumentation about how not only the security of the container, but how it's running, performing, et cetera, which is very interesting instrumentation as part of that. And that's tied back into Puppet, Chef, Ansible, name your deployment tool of choice.
Right.
Then you get the same effect.
Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah, I am having performance difficulties with my containers, so I use an instrumentation tool to go deploy more to get more resources.
Yeah, or we see some weird error getting thrown, so fix a new one, deploy it, and redeploy in production, something like that, right? You'll hear different opinions on this. I think the market will shake itself out a little bit. Being at the kernel means you have privilege. So if a container gets compromised and it has access to the kernel, does that mean you've compromised all your other containers? Which is also the concern with the privileged container approach, right? So as security professionals, we don't like to give privilege access, right? Privilege access at the kernel can be dangerous. Privilege access within a container could be dangerous, right? So these are just security things we have to think about in this new world of containerization. So, we'll see how this plays out. But
yeah, it's an interesting series of projects that I'm partaking in and sharing my experiences with our listeners as we talk about, asset management, as Matt mentioned, is super important, or asset discovery, I should say. How that ties into how you actually manage or orchestrate your infrastructure, whether you have containers or not, how you monitor that infrastructure. All of that stuff is changing, and there's lots of solutions out there. So I am probably going to play around with Zabbix and deploy that and talk about that on future shows. I think the aspect of the orchestration in containers is something else I'm also interested in learning as well. I'm trying to get Ansible deployed across all of my infrastructure containers as well, and see how that plays together. And certainly, I think that the message here is there's a lot of research that we need to do as IT and security professionals today to learn all this new stuff, because the newer technologies are really changing the way we think about managing IT. So it's exciting. I'm having a lot of fun, and I hope to share more on future episodes. Matt and Michael, thank you so much for coming in on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. Nice having you. And thank you, everyone, for listening and watching. We'll see you next time.